Well, thank you guys for coming. Today, we are going to talk about legal strategies for success for your small business. These are the top 5 real world strategies that I see every day. My associate is also here, Aubrey Dreyer. We were talking about her earlier. She's somebody also, if you come on and we assist you, she's somebody that would work with you as well. And these are the things. Some of these we see on a everyday basis sometimes. Some of these we see on a weekly basis, but they are definitely the top 5 real world things that we see and kind of strategies for your business to make you be stronger, and really, set yourself up for success. So who am I? I actually own 3 companies as what 3 companies technically right now. But I give you a little bit of my background so you understand where I come from, because I am a 4th generation entrepreneur. My dad, we grew up, running family businesses, and I saw him struggle every day with so many things like you guys do. And one of them was really the legal. He just never really had access to affordable legal representation, or even access just to even know an attorney that he could partner with and feel like he could go and ask questions. And there was some major things, I won't get into those right now, but there were major things that happened to my father's business just because he didn't feel like there was somebody to ask those questions. So that is why I actually went out on my own. I've worked in a rather large law firm. I've had some, worked in other ones. I've did trials in the past, worked as in-house for one of the largest companies in the world, but I came back to actually opening my own firm, which we actually met our 1 year this year, as of this month, and went out on my own so that I can actually help small businesses. And what I do is I really partner with small businesses throughout each stage of their business. A lot of things we do is like formations, contracts, negotiations, trademarks, stuff like that, copyrights. But I really just act as a partner in both my law firm, and then I have a separate consulting company. I'm a certified small business consultant through the AASBC. I work a lot with actual female new and startup companies where we really focus on profit strategies and helping you build a business built on making money in your sleep. So that's why recently I co-authored a book called From Hustler to Investor, where it really focuses on this. And one of the largest strategies in it is actually using your intellectual property to really build a business that you can make money in your sleep. And we'll talk about that later on in this presentation. I just mentioned that, where I hope that you will start thinking about some of these things to really maximize on your business. The other business I just have, it's kind of my Legal Fluence brand. I have a Legal Fluence contract template shop where they are several attorney drafted contract templates, because I know as small businesses, I will get those calls, and you're going to learn in this presentation, there's so much power in contracts, and sometimes you can't afford to have it customized, right? So these are contract templates that I do not hesitate to use. And they can really get you started, especially if you're a new business. And then I have a legal membership underneath that brand as well. So I stay busy, guys. So the first kind of question I have for you today is, I really want to know, why did you make a decision to show up here today? Feel free to write in the comments or anything like that. And the other thing I really want to know is, what do you do? I'm really curious to see if you guys want to put your name, your company in the chat. I'd love to know, that some of the types of businesses that are here today. I'd love to know, maybe you're in consulting too. Maybe you own a product store, or I don't know, a restaurant. Like, I'd love to know kind of the different businesses. So as I'm talking today, I can, include those in some of the conversations we're having. Trying to look. Hello, there's Aubrey. I don't know where my notes are, but feel free to share your name, travel advisor. Awesome. Very cool. Your name, your company. I mean, that's a way also for the other people in this presentation to know who you are if you're going to be asking questions later, and who your business is. Party rental. Cool. Very cool. Yeah, all this stuff. All this stuff is going to help you guys today. I'm a lawyer. Awesome. Custom home building company. That's amazing, Amanda. Parents morning out. I have so many questions. That sounds awesome. A sweet and treat shop. Yep. Yep. my Miss Brightside's maids. Oh, awesome. Kitchen designer. Perfect. Substitute teaching for childcare programs across Kansas. Yay. So many things. Okay. Well, then I do honestly think this presentation will help you today. If you have been asking yourself at all, maybe you aren't sure if your legal foundation is correct. Maybe you aren't sure if your assets are truly protected. Maybe today you don't know the difference between a 1099 contract or an employee. And maybe you don't actually know that you can misclassify them and it can lead to really horrible penalties. And maybe you aren't sure if your contracts are truly, they have all those key provisions in them. Or maybe you have a website with no policies, no agreements on there. And we'll talk about those, as some are required, some are not, but strongly recommended. So what I hope today you go away with is your first steps, at least have that down if you don't already, but also how to maintain the correct business structure for legal protection, and know the importance of contracts and some of the common missing provisions that I see that you'll be able to go back and look at your contracts and say, ooh, do I have that in there? I want you to hopefully be able to leave recognizing and protecting your intellectual property early on and thinking about how you can strategically use that for the future. Understanding how to correctly classify your 1099 contractors and or employees. So a lot of the businesses that I was seeing as you were popping up there, some of you may never have an employee, but you may have contractors. And so when I'm addressing those things, it's also going to affect you because you're going to want to make sure that they truly are a contractor. And lastly, know what the website policies, what are the common ones, what those look like, the ones that are required, and how you can stay in compliance. Okay, so I know Lisa already mentioned this, but I wouldn't be a great attorney if I at least didn't let you guys know. Here's my legal disclaimer. Obviously, this presentation is for informational purposes only. I am not giving any type of legal advice. If you, I would love to help you. And if you would like that, once we sign an engagement letter, we would love to help you, and you can do so after this presentation. And the Missouri one, that's required. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision. It should not be based on advertisements if you consider this an advertisement. Okay, legal strategy number one. This will probably be to some people the most boring one because you hear it all the time. You need some type of legal entity in place. These are the four main types that we'll talk about here to get started: a sole proprietorship, a corporation, a partnership, and a limited liability company. Those are the main types. There are in other states, some states have a few different variations. I think you can be like a professional limited liability partnership in Kansas. Like there are a few differences. That's why sometimes it is beneficial to go and, talk to a professional about this before deciding on one. But these are the main four. A sole proprietorship is a business entity, but understand it's actually not a legal entity. It's not going to provide any type of limited or any type of liability protection, which I'll go into a little bit more in a second. But it's just a business owned, operated by one person without forming any type of separate legal entity. That's a sole proprietorship. A corporation is a legal entity. So we've actually gone from a business entity to a legal entity that is separate and distinct from its owners. And it can enter into, the corporation alone can enter into contracts, it can own assets, it can sue and be sued. They're established to conduct business, and their owners are typically known as shareholders who do have that limited liability, meaning they are not personally responsible for the corporation's debts or liabilities. A partnership can be what we call general or an LLP, a limited liability partnership. And that's just a business arrangement where two or more individuals agree to share in all assets, profits, financial, legal liabilities, all of that. And that's usually to go into business with each other. And that can also be not just individuals, it can also be two businesses, which is always very interesting to me. A general partnership is going to have no limited liability protection, and that's very similar to sole proprietorship. We're not actually a legal entity. We're just more like a business entity. We have not put in place anything with the state. The last one is a limited liability company. That will probably be what most of you will decide to do at the end of the day. It is very, very popular for small and medium-sized businesses. And it's a business structure that kind of combines those elements of both the corporation and the partnership. The owners are referred to as members, unlike, a corporation where they're shareholders, and the LLC provides those members with that limited liability protection while allowing for flexible management and pass-through taxation. When I say pass-through taxation, I mean essentially you still are filing your taxes as a personal person. All your tax liability just kind of flows through to you. You're not filing separate taxes like you would in a corporation. Okay. So what does that really mean? Because the one thing that I did this presentation a couple weeks ago live, and I realized I didn't exactly spell this out enough after getting a question or two. Because what I get a lot of times is people are like, well, I just need to go get an LLC or I need to go get a partnership. And they don't necessarily understand what that means. Because when I'm throwing out all these terms like they're not personally responsible or they're a limited liability, what does that really mean? Well, what we are really worried about, I want you to understand, because if you understand why we need that legal entity, then you will be able to start thinking more about keeping it in place, understanding what type of entity you need, and when it's important to start thinking about if you need another one. So what we have in a business, right? We're going to have our personal assets, and then we're going to have these business assets, right? So what we want to make sure is that we are essentially putting a fence. We want to put a fence around our personal assets so that if we get sued, if somebody threatens a lawsuit, if somebody sends us a demand letter, if somebody, says, you hurt me, we are able to put a fence around our personal assets. And what do those assets look like? It would be like our bank account, our car, our house, anything, that they could come and get. Essentially, we want to put a fence around that. And it's not just now, but it's also in the future. So that's why a lot of times we get the question of, okay, well, when do I go get an LLC? Well, we're not just protecting your personal assets now, we're also protecting them into the future. And then that way, if somebody sues, they can't come after you personally. They can only go after the business. I hope that makes sense. And if it does not, please ask questions. But now we can kind of get into, okay, well, what are those pros and cons of each so that you can decide or make sure that you've got the right entity in place? Because after this presentation, you may be asking yourself, maybe I should have done a different type of entity that may be better suited for you. So the sole proprietorship, as I said earlier, is just, there's no real legal entity in place. So we don't have that fence there ever. We're not going to have that fence. It's just you're doing business. And as soon as you start selling anything that's kind of really not a W-2, it's not a employee wages, the government's going to consider you a business and you're really a sole proprietor. So the pros to this, though, it's simple to establish. It just automatically is established, really. You do have full control of decisions. You're basically just your taxes, your profits are taxed on your personal income. But the cons are there is absolutely no personal liability. You have less credibility with banks, customers a lot of times. You can't raise capital. There's a lot of things you can't do as a sole proprietorship. Very hard to get any type of grants or loans, or I know there was a lot of people during COVID with the small business loans that were going out that they had to have these entities in place. So a sole proprietorship really is something that you need to think about for yours, but most likely you should be leaning always towards, unless it's really, this is what I usually do with my clients, unless it's just a small hobby that you are making a very little amount of money, usually because it's the bar is not high to either get like a LLC or something. Usually you don't stay a sole proprietorship. Again, it does depend on your situation, but generally, if it's a hobby, something you're maybe making $100 or $2 a month, and it's a low risk thing, that would be the only thing I would be thinking about for a sole proprietorship. For instance, trying to give you guys some general examples, but maybe somebody who has a side art business and they do just like stickers and stuff like that. And maybe they make $200 a month on this hobby. Maybe that's something you keep a sole proprietorship. Art is a low risk thing. And there's not a lot of money going out. But beside that, you're really going to want to think about, okay, well, I probably need a legal entity in place. The corporation is kind of the next one. I would kind of lump in an S corporation. I'm not going to get into the details of that. You don't really need to know that today, or a nonprofit. But they are still going to provide the shareholders, you as the owner, that limited liability. They can, go forever. and you have all that ability to raise capital. So these are very, very attractive type of entities for like investors. So if you're planning to bring on investors or anything, this is usually what you would be looking at. And it provides you sometimes a lot of credibility to the public. I've known a lot of people that just choose corporations because they just want to seem credible. But why do we not want to do these sometimes? Well, they can be very complex. You are going to be double taxed, meaning you file taxes for yourself and you file taxes on the corporation. There is a lot more scrutiny with corporations. You have less management flexibility, and there is a lot of just formalities and record keeping and meetings and all that stuff required that's not necessarily required with some others. The next I'll talk about is a partnership, and that's just two people or businesses kind of coming together, and they are sharing in all the assets and profits and the financial, all those responsibilities. And if you are an LLP, you can have that limited liability protection. And it would be a pass-through tax. Again, it's just going on all the profits would go on your personal taxes. You're sharing responsibility with that other person, meaning all the liabilities and profits you're sharing in there. And it's pretty flexible in management. So you can, do certain things unlike a corporation. The cons though, you can have potential for conflicts. It is always going to be joint liability usually. It can be a lot of instability, especially with a general partnership. If you don't have any type of that legal entity in place, like you haven't actually filed for the LLP, that in that case, you would also not have liability. So a lot of times nowadays, what you would be and what is probably the most popular anymore is a limited liability company. And I want to point out that this is really a pretty new creature, which is why if there's one thing that I see a lot wrong with advice, clients that come to me or even on Facebook, is that people will still recommend other entities away from an LLC. And I had one situation where I'm discussing, okay, well, why did you become a corporation? And they said, oh, well, my dad who was in business told me that that's what I got to do. And I was like, well, how long has your dad been in business? They were like, 40 years. I'm like, oh, well, that makes perfect sense. LLCs did not come around. They were not even allowed in Missouri and Kansas until the mid 90s. So before that, really the only option was corporations. Now we have this really kind of great entity that is super flexible, combines the corporation and the partnership together, and allows for tax flexibility, still provides that limited liability. So we're putting that fence around our personal assets. It creates there's all types of flexibility in the management and the ownership, you can do different portions and profits and like who gets, different amounts of profits out of the business and however much percentage you own the business, lots of things. There are really, I have a con list, but really the cons are a lot less than most of the other type of business entities. Sometimes you can have a limited life if you've set it the LLC to be that way. Sometimes it can have fewer incentives. As I said earlier, some people will pick corporations because those seem more credible than like an LLC. And sometimes you have annual fees and stuff like that. But and you are taxed usually on a self-employment tax, but we will talk in a second how you can be an LLC and not have to essentially pay some of those self-employment tax. So an LLC, I just want you to keep in mind, don't listen to everybody's advice on if they say, no, don't do that. I would be questioning, okay, well, are we working in the world now that LLCs have become important? We have somebody raised a hand. Sure, I'll take it now. Yeah, I'm cool with that. Should I be looking on a different thing for the Q&A? Got it. Nope. Will this recording be sent to us later so we can rewatch? I do not know that answer. Lisa? Oh, can't hear you. Ask to unmute.
Oops, sorry. No, we do not send out the video. It will be edited at some point and added to our YouTube channel. And what I will do is make a note to myself to send out a notice to all the attendees when that YouTube video is live. And if you have more questions, please do drop them in the Q&A and then we can add them. Someone raised a hand. And I thought Sheila, can't find you. There you are. You might have had a question about the presentation. Otherwise, if you will just drop your questions in the chat. But Sheila, did you have a question about something she had already raised in the presentation?
Yeah, feel free to drop that in there, and I'm going to
I'm going to allow
answer.
you to talk.
Great.
So
Go
Sheila,
ahead.
I'm trying to unmute her. She's not unmuted. Okay, we'll come back to you.
Yes, I
There
no,
you are.
I'm fine. I heard my answer.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
Cindy has asked a really great question, though, and I think this is a great point to kind of talk about this. It leads in really well to what I'm going to talk about on this slide. So Cindy asks, if you set up as a sole proprietor, can I switch to an LLC? And if so, is the transition complex? So yeah, one of the things we want to be doing, and actually I always tell my clients, even maybe on a yearly basis, we want to start thinking about reevaluating that structure, because really sometimes that may transition as our business transition. And yes, you definitely, if you are right now just operating as a sole proprietor, you can easily become an LLC. It's not, so again, I'm not giving legal advice, but generally that paperwork kind of looks like filing with the state, having an operating agreement, getting your EIN number. It's not super complex. If you can always, check with the Missouri. I don't know if you're in Missouri or Kansas, but a lot of times the Secretary of State will have information on there about what you need to do. You can always also ask an attorney for help, or another professional, but it's not super complex, especially an LLC. Corporation can be a little bit more, but not at all. And you really should be thinking about that. If you are worried at all about, that anybody coming and being able to have access to your personal assets, again, either now or also in the future. So that's what we are thinking about. Okay, so and we really don't want to wait until I hear this a lot of, well, I'm going to wait until I make X amount, 6 figures or something in my business to become an LLC or get that limited liability. Again, we want to start thinking about, we want to protect ourselves now and in the future. So we don't want to be waiting until we make X amount of money. As I told you, really a sole proprietorship is really more for like a hobby or something you're making very, very little money in, with low risk. Other than that, we want to be doing this as soon as possible. So again, we're protecting ourselves now and for our future. Earlier, I talked about the fact that with an LLC, you do are taxed on self-employment and all that, and there can be some higher taxes than a corporation. You can talk to your CPA, and I would suggest it after you're making a bit of profit in your business. It can be beneficial to be taxed. You wouldn't change out of an LLC. You'd still be an LLC for your legal entity, but your tax entity can change to what's called an S Corp. So that's all I will say about that. I would just suggest after you start making profit, go to your CPA and ask them, hey, when should I start thinking about being an S Corp, or is this a good time to have that discussion? So just checking the notes. You guys wrote some. Cindy, she asked, since the state of Kansas does not accept DBA, do we have to register as a sole proprietor only? So that's a little bit off subject. Cindy, I would suggest going and talking to a professional about, really, we want to get you protected. That sole proprietor, that DBA is not going to offer you any legal protection. No, that's not answering your question, but I'm really going to direct you to actually thinking about maybe, again, not giving you legal advice, but thinking more or less like about what legal entity you can get in place instead of trying to figure out how to make the sole proprietor work. Not going to lie. Connie wrote, I have my LLC and asked my CPA recently about S Corp as some colleagues brought it up. And he said, it's too much work. It can be. So it really is only beneficial at a certain point in your business. But once you get to that point, it can be beneficial. So just keep on asking your CPA as you continue to grow, and that answer may change. Another thing that we can really strategize on, and I just I'm not going to get into huge details, but something that I love doing is doing series LLCs. Those are definitely allowed in Missouri. It's great. It's a unique structure that we're able to kind of compartmentalize different business ventures and properties. So it's really, really popular if you're doing real estate, or if you have different businesses where we kind of just create a main LLC and we can have these different LLC funnels. So what does that do? Well, not only do you have that fence around your personal liability, if somebody tries to sue one of those funnels, so say we have a rental housing, say we have a rental, we have one rental house and we have one house that we are, flipping. Okay. Well, if somebody, our tenant gets mad and sues our rental, they won't be able to get to the other assets in our other businesses. They wouldn't be able to get to the flip house. So it can be very beneficial to create additional fences, right? And that is something, if you start growing or start investing in property or something, it's something to start considering and strategizing it. It's really great. And the last one is something that I truly don't think enough people think about is their exit strategy, ensuring that not only the entity matches some type of exit strategy that you've been thinking about, but making sure that you've thought about, well, if I pass, what happens to my business? Because I will tell you, out of my own experience, there's and I'm sure a lot of you guys are here, maybe solopreneurs, you're by yourself and you're like, well, my business will just go away. I don't have, plans to pass it on. I don't plan to sell it. But when you die, your family, if you don't have something set up in place, like they are devastated by your death, right? They can't think clearly. So you almost want to make sure that you have that plan in place though for them, not just for you. You've got to think about, do I need to have this in place for them? Because they're not going to want to be grieving and trying to figure out what you would want in that business. So things that you can think about, I have them down, like implementing like a buy-sell agreement. Maybe that's something in place where you have an employee or another business owner or something that would take over your clients, stuff like that. So those are all things that just to kind of start thinking about, that they match your entity, that you've got those kind of foundational pieces in place. Okay. Next, power of contracts. I think these are so underestimated every day when I talk to people. So contracts are great. We all know that they are great for setting out pricing and everybody understanding how much you're going to charge them and when it'll be due. We understand all those things. But there are so many other ways that we can use the contract. And I'm going to go over a couple provisions today that I see commonly missing out of contracts that we should be considering. But they do so many things. They really solidify that trust with, either your client or another business that you are teaming up with. They can really prevent expensive legal battles, if anything. If there's anything that I learned doing litigation previously, is that trials cost now upward of 6 figures, 100K and above for you to go to trial. And even through just the initial stages of discovery, that could be 50, 60,000. So we're trying to put provisions in there. What's like an ADR, an alternative dispute resolution provision. We're trying to think about, should we be having us talk about should we be, if there's a problem with this contract, should we be going to arbitration? Is that better for us? Sometimes that's better for businesses, sometimes it's not. But these alternative dispute resolutions where we can, or force an informal mediation to start with. Those are the other things we can do on contracts that will save you money and headaches, severe headaches for your business in the long run. Also, we'll talk a little bit more about later, but claiming attorney fees and costs in those contracts. I commonly see those left out. Being indemnified. So I don't know if any of you guys have ever heard this word, being indemnified, but these are huge provisions that if you have any type of contracts with another business, you have a contractor, you're working with vendors, you're getting ready to just team up on a project with somebody. These type of provisions can be super, super important. So what are they? An indemnification provision is pretty much just going to be saying, hey, if something happens, so say we have two businesses, something happens and it's not my fault at all, it's not my business's fault, then I have the ability, if we get sued, if it's not my fault at all, and really it's your fault, you're going to indemnify me. You're going to then pay for any judgment against me and all my attorney fees. So essentially would be back to zero with your insurance, okay? So it can be very beneficial. And it can limit some of that liability too in those provisions, and they can become very important. Those are the provisions we also want to use in contracts that can be very, very powerful. And we want to avoid chargebacks. So I'm going to go into that a little bit more right now. Chargebacks. So I don't know if any of you guys have had chargebacks, but these are becoming more and more common. It is where you have a customer or a client that you have already provided them a product or service, and they dispute it on their credit card, or they dispute it on PayPal or some other third party. But PayPal, I will tell you guys, I'm not trying to chalk trash them, but man, they make it so, so difficult for you as the business owner. They are super customer friendly, and they will do everything to allow that chargeback. So you are going to need super evidence anymore, like basically a signed contract saying that you don't have a refund policy or something, and kind of spelling out that chargebacks aren't allowed. But they are becoming more and more common, and I'm having to help my clients dispute these. So well, I'll give you guys some ideas on how we can also prevent these in a second too. But the one way to do it is definitely to think about what refund policy do you have in your contract now? Is it clear? Does it say there is no refund? Or maybe there is a refund, but when that ends or when it expires. And that will assist. And do you have your customers or clients, if you're in a service-based business, signing that contract? We do want to make sure of that, because that really is the best evidence. Like with PayPal, if we send them a contract and it says there's no refund, they sign this contract on X date, and then we will get it overturned. But something kind of short of that, it's pretty difficult. The other thing is we're really looking at other types of clauses that are going to prevent late payments, because that's the other thing that I have commonly. My clients are, this person isn't paying, this person, isn't paying their bill, right? That's a pretty common thing. So here's just like some example language that I use a lot, or I'll see in contracts that I think are pretty good. But we're having a payment due date, and we are putting late fees and interest on that. And that at least allows you, if you ever do have to take them to small claims court or file a lawsuit, you have that ability to take that late fee and interest. And I will tell you though, as a business owner, and I have this conversation a lot, what you put in your contract, you don't necessarily have to enforce, okay? You are the business owner. And so if at any point you're like, I'm going to waive that late fee, you can. You're better off a lot of times putting in provisions that are more stricter and then saying, well, that's okay. And then what do you look like? You look like the great business owner who took the interest and the late fee off. But think about these provisions, because people will look at your contracts and it may scare them away from not paying when they may pay later. And you want to have those things in place, as I said, if you do ever have to enforce it. I see Sheila raised her hand. Lisa, you want to, or Sheila, I'll just ask you to unmute because it looks like you're still there. I don't know if it'll allow you. Can I?
Destiny, that's left over from the last time. Sheila,
Oh, it
just
is?
Yeah.
Sheila, put your hand
Oh, okay.
down, please.
Oh, okay.
You're good.
Sorry. No, all good.
Sorry about that.
Nope, you're all good. I just was like, that looks new. All right. Okay, so the next one that I really want you guys to think about if it's in your contracts, and this would be for mainly all of them, is if your contract allows for attorney fees and costs, if you had to dispute or there's any type of dispute related to that agreement. Okay, so what I commonly get is, hey, this person didn't pay their bill, or there's a dispute between businesses, or they breached the contract and all these things. And every day people come, those business owners, they say, okay, well, can we ask for my attorney fees, right? And I'm like, well, that's going to be based upon what's in your contract. So they're in America. This is not necessarily everywhere, but you can only get attorney fees and costs if in two situations. If it's in statute, like there's a statute that allows for it, and that is very few statutes, and they're very strict statutes like consumer protection laws and stuff like that, or it's in a contract. So if we don't have a provision that allows for attorney fees and costs, You don't get them. You can't ask for them. You're not going to be allowed them, I'm telling you, especially like with late payment and all that. And it makes it hard. And I will tell you, it makes a difference when I'm advising my clients on if they should file a small claim, file some type of small claims action, or I file a small claim action for them, or we're filing something, because attorney fees, obviously, for those type of things can be thousands of dollars. But if we have a provision that allows for those, well, that creates a lot more momentum for you. And it also creates, even if we don't go and actually file the lawsuit, it's going to create leverage and negotiation power. So that if we do even have to send that demand letter, we're going to say, hey, and our contract allows for those attorney fees and costs. And we're going to go after those as well. And it's allowed. So I will say right now, if there's anything you go home, you think about what's in your contract, this is something that you want to think about. This is some example language of that. Like, in the event that your company must take legal action to collect any amounts due under this agreement, the client agrees to pay all reasonable costs of collection, including attorney fees and court costs. So something like that. Again, you may need a little bit different language, and that may be something to talk to a professional about. But and this last kind of provision here is just to kind of say that if you are somebody that sends out invoices, it may be a situation where you're saying, even if you didn't receive this invoice or anything, you still have to pay the late fees, the non-payment fees, and all the different provisions that are in the contract. All right. I'm trying to keep up on the Q&As, guys, but keep sending them. Legal strategy number 3. So properly classifying 1099 contractors and employees. So just curious, does anybody have employees in your business now? Kind of getting an idea of how many of you guys have employees. And now I can't see where I have my Q&A up, but I'm looking for the other one. Okay, well, I can't see, but I'm going to assume that some of you guys have employees and contractors. So what
We've
is
got a lot of yeses coming through
Got
here.
a lot of yeses. Okay, great.
Yes, we have both. 3 employees and tons of independent contractors. Yes, 7.
Okay, wow, great. This is great. Well, I hope this stuff I know this will benefit you, because, so just to nail it down in case anyone didn't know, independent contractor, they get paid as a 1099. Basically, we don't take those taxes out of their paycheck. It provides services usually under a contract or an agreement, and the employee is just your typical get paid a W-2. You're taking out all their taxes. They're working under you as the employer's control and direction. Basically, they're kind of paid, typically a 1099 contract is going to be paid per project at a negotiated rate, and they're not going to be typically eligible for benefits. They're responsible for paying their own taxes, and they're really controlling how they work, when they work, all of that stuff, right? An employee, they're receiving that regular paycheck. You're withholding their taxes, and that employee has a lot less control over the work processes, and they typically must adhere to the company policies and schedules, okay? That's what we know them to be. But even if we know them to be this, the government can still come in and say you have misclassified them. And what does that look like? Well, it's not great. And I unfortunately have these clients that come to us, and they are in hot water because they have misclassified a contractor, and that can be severe fines and penalties. And when I say severe, thousands of dollars from the IRS, other agencies. You can end up having to pay back taxes for FICA, FUTA, and they're all with interest. And then there always can be the potential for lawsuits from those misclassified workers. And it does happen because there are attorneys that will take those cases on, and they will sue you. And then there's a lot of impact with it. You have an audit risk. And obviously it can have some reputational damages on you. So how do we, and what I'm hoping to, for all of you guys to leave with, is to understand at least the basics of being able to avoid that misclassification. Because I will tell you guys, the law on this just recently changed. I think it was, I'm going to find the exact date, but I think it was February when they first put it in place. the U.S. Department of Labor, the DOL, announced, oh, it was in January actually of this year, of its final rule regarding whether a worker is an employee or an independent contractor under the Fair Labor Standards Act, the FLSA. So the new rule became effective March 11th, so not even 2 months ago, and it rescinded the 2021 independent contractor rule that former President Trump had put in place. So former President Trump, and I mean, me as an attorney, I'm not going to give my personal opinion, but a lot of people will say his rule in place basically really focused solely kind of on control. Did the employer control how they work? Did they control what you did? Did they control what you used? All that stuff. And it was heavily in dispute that it was super employer friendly and not employee, and it was not protecting employees enough. So they changed that starting in March, where now it is back to kind of the 6-factor test that I'm going to try to basically kind of narrow it down, where it asks questions now more than just control. So it's going to ask, like, can the worker earn more or less money based upon their own decisions? So is that contractor that you're working with, are they able to make more money each month by doing something or the other? Or is it, you know, a standard rate every month? That could go against you. If you are set on like just paying a contractor $150 each month for 5 hours a week or something like that, that could go against you now because of this change. And then another question is, how much money and stuff does the worker and the company put into the job? So one thing that has become a kind of a bigger issue that we've seen is, are the employer providing materials? So if you are providing materials, like say a laptop, or I don't know, pens, papers, like what materials are you actually providing? That can go against you if we're providing materials and the contractor is not fully providing those. How long is the job supposed to last? It is really riding on now, is this more of a project base, or is this a long-term thing where there's, you know, they're more permanent in your company and they've been working there 10 years or something, or 2 years, or you expect them to be working for the next 5 years. And always, we still go back to how much control does the company have over the worker? That's still going to be one of the factors that a court or the government will look at. Is the work a big part of what your company does? So the legal term that they use, is it an integral part? But really, does this contractor, are they doing a big part of what your company does? So say, trying to think of a good example here, but say your company is really focused around sales or something, and you have a salesman, and that I could, you know, they could argue is a very, very important part of what your company does. And so that could count against you. And then the last one is kind of, how much skill and effort does the worker need to bring to the job? So if they're bringing a lot of high skill, a lot of high effort, if they're like actually if they're in like a unique situation where they have high skill and like they're a consultant, that can work, you know, in your favor, that they would be a consultant versus the other. So those are really the main kind of 6 questions that they're going to be asking. They will look at other factors based upon your job, but really now you need to be kind of asking additional questions other than just, hey, am I just controlling this person? I would start always with that question though. Are you controlling what that contractor is doing? And if you are controlling any of it, if you're controlling their schedule, you're telling them to be there, you know, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, or you're telling them, no, you need to be at this job at 2 p.m. every day, that's going to be automatically an employee, right? Like we can say that. Beyond that, this may be a time where I'm not trying to get you guys to come to an attorney per se, but that it really can be a situation now where it would be good to think about going to a professional and asking, hey, you know, I'm in this situation. I just want to make sure that I'm really classifying them correctly, because it can be a very, very detrimental if you end up misclassifying somebody. So those are the things. And then also, if you talk to a professional, a lot of times what I end up doing with my clients is we strategize and make sure that we've got all these factors in a way where they are a contractor, and usually a lot of this stuff is flexible, right? When you're bringing on a contractor, instead of saying, you know, I'm going to keep providing them a computer, right? Like we'll just have them provide their own, and we can get that straight, right? And then how do we really make sure if we were to get audited or something? Well, we're going to put that into a contract. A contract or a 1099 agreement, if you do not have one of those with your contractors, I would suggest getting one now. So what we want to make sure in that agreement, though, is that we're showing that we have no control, that they're, you know, providing their own materials, that they have the ability to make or, you know, lose money. And we've got all those kind of factors thought about and put into that agreement, and that those are occurring. We're not just, you know, saying they're occurring, they're not, but, and those are occurring. And then if you get audited, that's always the first question, at least in my experience with these government agencies, that they ask for. Can I have the contractor agreement? And they want to see what that looks like. So just know consistent documentation is probably your best bet on all of that stuff. And then just reviewing and adjusting those policies. So maybe you brought somebody on for a project base to start with, and they've just kind of kept going. Well, think about that. Or are they now a very integral, a very, you know, important part of your company now? Well, we may have to adjust that. Maybe they were fine as a contractor to begin with, but maybe now they've really become this important part. So at the end of the day, if there's anything you guys think about, though, do go back to that control question first and then start thinking about those other things. Okay, so next, I can get my thing to go. Number 4, online privacy regulations and your website. So by show of hands, who has a website for your business? Let me ask that. Oh, I got 1, I got 2, I got 3. I got lots.
You got a few, about 3 more in the chat saying, yep, yes.
I got 6, I got 7, 8. Maybe I should have asked who doesn't have a website, but no, I don't. Okay, all right. So one of the things that I unfortunately commonly see is websites where they have no type of online policies. And some are required, actually legally required, based upon the way websites now work. And some are highly suggested. So these are probably the top 4 that that are just kind of the common website policies that if you were, you know, even to go to an attorney like me and have us draft them for you, these are the 4 that we're typically working with. So we're working with terms. Those are going to be things such as terms and conditions, terms of use. Those are kind of interchangeable. It used to be that like terms and conditions was for products, and terms of use was for like services, a privacy policy, a cookie policy, and then disclaimers. So these are the things that if you were on a website, and if I thought I could easily maneuver the Zoom, I would show you guys like on my website. But if you want to go to my website, it's www.boundsbusinesslaw.com. But you will see on the bottom of my website, it's going to have those links for like terms and conditions, privacy policy, and then I have a separate thing for, I think I've just included my general disclaimers in with my terms, which you can do that. And then I have a separate whole one though for a very, my legal disclaimer on the website separately. So some of these can vary about kind of where some of this stuff goes, but generally these are the 4 types of things that you would want to think about and have on your website. So to start with, a privacy policy, what is that? It's just a statement that's explaining how a company collects, handles, stores, and protects customers' data. A lot of times your privacy policy will also include a cookie policy. A cookie policy is explaining how the site uses little small files stored on users' devices that collect data about your browsing behavior. They called it cookies because they said that as you get on a website, you're leaving a little trail of cookies of like your usage. So they call it a cookie policy, but privacy policy is really about protecting that person's personal information, any type of information that could go back to that person. And a privacy policy is going to be basically legally required. So a privacy policy, there is a big one that's out of the GDPR, it's out of Europe. There's one out of California, and these require you to have a privacy policy in place. If they're to tell customers, clients, who's ever coming on the website, potential ones, if you collect personal data, if you don't collect personal data, but it's almost impossible anymore with any type of websites to not be collecting some type of personal data or their usage of it. And it must state basically what you take in or don't, how, and then what you do with it. And then how they can have you destroy it if they want you to destroy that information. And it is required. So this policy is very important. It can save you from a lot of headaches. And there are, unfortunately, more and more kind of lawsuits that are coming about that are even more focused towards small and medium-sized businesses. So this one, again, it's going to inform the users about any personal information. And then a lot of times you're also going to have that cookie policy that will talk about the use of that cookies in place, whatever, we'll call it cookies, but it's just funny. And then obtaining their consent and how they can delete it. The website terms, these are essentially, as I said earlier, they can be called terms of service, terms of use, and they are the rules for which one has to agree to in order to, and that they have to abide to essentially in order to use your website. These are not legally required, but I will tell you they are highly recommended. And it will make sense, I think, as I tell you kind of what should go into these, because you're going to start thinking about, oh yeah. So for one thing, I always tell my clients, I'm like, we want to protect your intellectual property. And I'll get into that a little bit more in a second, but these are like your pictures on your website, your wording on your website. We want to protect your branding, right? We can protect that by what we put in the terms. We also can put things in there about account management, how they can use the site. Like if you have somewhere where they can post comments somewhere, like we can limit how they can comment. They can't just trash talk you, right? And then we can go back to doing dispute resolution type clauses in there that if they ever have an issue with your services or the product they're buying, or something that's said on the website, we can require them to come to an alternative dispute resolution type situation. As I said, we could do a formal mediation or arbitration. We can write all these in to those terms so that, again, we're not having to end up in a very, very expensive legal battle, right? So those are just some of the things we write into terms. There's a lot more, but these terms are really going to protect your rights of your business, and it's defining those responsibilities of the user. And a lot of these should be tailored to your specific business model and service offers because it's going to be different. I mean, if you have a product that's, I'm trying to think of something like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of something that's super risky. Like say you sell fire extinguishers, that's going to be a lot different than if you're just selling shirts, right? Like we're going to have super duper different warranties on that fire extinguisher than we are going to have a shirt. The last thing that sometimes actually goes into the terms, or it can be separate, depending on what we're trying to limit the liability on. So again, if we go back to the fire extinguisher versus a shirt, we're going to have different disclaimers because of the risks involved. But disclaimers, basically, those are going to be statements that limit your company's liability. And as I said, they're found in the terms and conditions. But the common disclaimers too that we would put like on a website would be something like no responsibility for errors in the information provided. So for instance, if you have like blogs or something, we can enter a disclaimer that says, we don't have any responsibility, well, as much as we can limit, of the information that's being, any errors that could be found in this information, or no endorsement of third-party content. A lot of times on your websites, you may be linking to other websites, or, putting that information on your website, and you can say, well, there's no real endorsement or no liability to those external links. We're trying to limit, limit our liability, pull us away from that and lower our risk of getting sued. Other common disclaimers, if you're a professional, would be like mine. I have a legal disclaimer on my website of, any information on here is general information and not legal advice, right? That may be something, if you're related at all in the health field, we want to make sure we have some type of a health disclaimer, that's not medical advice and they should seek an actual professional for that, right? These can really be essential for your website if you have any type of detailed information. if you're offering advice or anything, any information services that could impact the user's decision or actions. So these do need to usually be very clearly written, and is one of those things that I'll go back to Lisa's comment. Sometimes you just need to consult an attorney. Disclaimers are a really good thing, if not one of the most things in this presentation today that you should consult an attorney on, because they can really affect if you are working online. Okay, the last legal strategy I have for you guys today is to think about your intellectual property earlier than later. I hope that today, because a lot of, as you're getting started, the intellectual property can fall in the wayside, unless you have maybe like if you're, getting ready to start up a large tech company, or maybe you are really looking into a certain type of product, maybe you haven't, but a lot of service-based type-based businesses, which I know there was a lot of shout outs of service type-based businesses and just some local businesses. You probably didn't think about your intellectual property when you're owning much. You may have thought about, make sure I'm not infringing on somebody's name and stuff like that. But there are some things that we should think about even farther than that. So what is intellectual property? When I keep saying this, I will tell you, essentially, it's just creations of the mind that you're using in your business. The main types of IP are patents. Patents are going to be things like inventions, anything that can be considered an invention, and it's usually for a limited time when that is occurring. Trademarks, that's going to be a simple word like your name, your logo, your slogan, stuff like that, that distinguish your good or service from that of another type of good or service. And then copyrights, basically these are, works of art. They are original works of authorship fixed in usually some type of, tangible medium. They can be things like artwork, poetry, novels, movies, songs, computer software, even architecture, even. It can be pretty broad, but it's like things that we're thinking about more artistically, or words. Again, like if you're writing a blog, you could end up having copyrights in that blog. And then last, trade secrets. It's basically made by contract though. So if you think about one of the best examples I love to give is Coca-Cola. So Coca-Cola, they have a syrup that starts out the Coca-Cola. And there's only one facility overseas that makes the syrup, and they bottle that syrup, and then they send it to these manufacturers across the nation, or maybe even international, where they then put the carbonation with it, and it becomes the Coke that you drink. But none of these other warehouses and bottling companies know anything about what's in the syrup except those few people who make the syrup at that one facility. And they are all bound by what's called an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. So they cannot talk about it. So that's what a trade secret is. And you have to be very careful about, not making that secret public, and not people that don't need to know about it. So that's the thing. They limit it to just the people that absolutely have to know about that, how the syrup is made. Okay, so I love to talk about intellectual property, I won't lie, but I won't keep you guys here all day. But the one thing, your intellectual property, I don't care really about what type of business you're in. There's about every business you can harness your intellectual property. It can be your largest asset because there are so many ways that you can license it out. And this can be as simple as like, for instance, when in the last year, I had teamed up with a financial advisor, a money coach, that's actually who I wrote my book with. But prior to that, she asked me, hey, I'd love for you to do a couple of courses in my passive income pathway online kind of 6-week course. And she offered me royalties of whatever percentage of the course. And now it's licensed out. And every time that she sells that course, I get a percentage of that. And that's just me licensing out. I'm kind of loaning or leasing. I'm not fully selling it. So at any time I can actually say, please stop using my videos or my portions of the courses I did. And I can stop that. But that can be as simple as licensing. It doesn't have to be extreme as like Walt Disney World. Walt Disney World actually, I think nowadays it's like 70 to 80% of the revenue from Walt Disney is licensing, them licensing out usage of their all their, different cartoons and all their stuff that they have those intellectual property rights in. And you can start doing that too in so many ways, partnering with different businesses, coming up with, as I said, like course creation, educational related material, licensing your brand to another company. Maybe you want to start expanding. Like these are all things that you have to think about and are really easy ways to make money in your sleep. So we want to think about maybe earlier than later. Don't underestimate the mouse. It's true. The mouse, yes. We want to think about maybe sooner than later, though. Maybe federally registering our trademark or federally registering our copyright, stuff like that. If you do have an invention, I hope you've already talked to a patent attorney, because that is way, way, way time sensitive. And so what I'm going to talk about now is more your name, your logo, your slogan, and stuff like that, your copyrights that you aren't necessarily have to federally register, but it definitely will limit your ability if you ever have a dispute or anyone's ever infringing. And it can also limit your ability then to license out some of that usage. So think about, should I start federally registering sooner than later? Because to federally register a trademark right now, it can take up to almost 2 years. I am not kidding. It can be a very long drawn out process. It used to only be like a year. And then unfortunately, the United States Patent and Trademark Office got entirely overloaded in COVID, and they are very behind. So you just want to start thinking about it sooner than maybe later. With patents, as I said, first in time to file, very time limited. You only have 12 months after public disclosure to register. Trademarks, copyrights, and sometimes even with that stuff, it can affect the priority of your mark, because if we are federally registering it, we can do things that have a earlier first in time, first in right. So for instance, I want to spell it out a little bit. In America, at least with trademarks and copyrights situations, the rights, the owner is the person of that trademark or copyright who used it first in time. They have first in right to that. That is different in some countries, where it's whoever filed the federal registration or that registration. That's not the case here, which is nice, but sometimes it still can affect the priority of the mark. And then at least with copyrights, if you do not federally register that, you cannot file any lawsuit, and you cannot really even file what's called a DMCA takedown notice. So this is a great thing. If you ever find anybody who is infringing like on your website or your name or anything, you can file a DMCA takedown notice with like that, the host of the website or the social media provider, whoever that they are infringing, and they have to immediately take it down. And then the burden is on the person who is allegedly infringing to show that they are not. The problem with that is that we have to have, we really want to have that federal registration in place, or we can't file a lawsuit, we can't enforce it, and they are probably just going to dispute it and it will go away. So those are some things to think about, but there are ways to fight infringers. And unfortunately, with all of the great amounts of social media and online sales, infringements are only going to get worse, not better. So you are going to start seeing more and more infringers, unfortunately, and ways to really curve that is to start thinking about federal registrations and stuff like that beforehand. And obviously, being able to maximize it. So these are just some of the examples that I have had a pleasure in being a part of or hearing about, or just being able to help in, that are just kind of some unique opportunities that female entrepreneurs, I'm not trying to limit the males, but I mean, we are the Women's Business Center right now, but opportunities that I've seen where females have been able to license out their intellectual property. So my greatest example I leave is with a gal who, because I think sometimes as females, we just think we have these great ideas and we just don't know how to execute on them. Well, she had a fabulous idea for these great clothing designs. Well, she just really felt that she couldn't get, a certain it was just going to be all this huge process, right? Finding the manufacturers, finding people to, where to find the materials and all this. Well, she ended up just licensing out those designs to a big company and making money in her sleep. So she doesn't do anything now except they have the designs, and then every time they're using those designs, then they are paying her royalties on that design that she just made once. So these are the things you just want to start thinking about, that if you're coming up with great ideas, these creations of the mind, it doesn't have to stop there. And you don't necessarily have to go out and get all the funding and do all the things. We can strategize and really make it possible in some other ways. So that is all I have for you guys today. I did not check the questions yet. But if you guys have additional questions, I am here to answer them right now. I think we have a good 20 minutes left to answer questions. And just so you guys know, these are the different websites for my stuff. If you're interested in my book or my consulting agency, that's at boundfordestiny.com. My contract template store and the legal membership is at legal.fluence.com. And then my law firm is at boundsbusinesslaw.com. If you're needing any type of legal assistance, you can easily book a 15-minute free consult call on my website at the business law website. So, okay.
All right, we have a few questions, but I also saw in the chat that Amanda asked if you could go back to the last slide so she could take a picture.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I kind of went over that one fast because there's just a lot of information on there. Sorry.
Lot of great information. So one of the questions, I don't know, were you able to get the Q&A back up?
I did, finally. Sorry.
So you go ahead. I'll let you work through those. These
are the days that I feel like I need like 4 monitors. I already have 2 up and I still can't find everything. Okay. Angie, what are your thoughts on work/trade? It's a common practice for yoga studios to hire someone to give them free yoga instead of money. What are my thoughts on work/trade? I mean, my first thought is make sure you're doing it, in a tax suitable way. I mean, that would be my only concern. I got to say that as an attorney, like I would be worried about the taxes, but I mean, as outside of that, because that would be my only legal concern, is maybe having a contract for it just to make it clear, and ensuring that it's just, in the contract as kind of a quid pro quo situation. You do this, I get this. We're understanding that these are the same value. You could try it that way. I mean, I still would have some questions for my CPA if I'm doing that right. But I mean, other than that, I mean, I don't have too many other thoughts. If you have an additional question for that, I can answer it. Cindy, my W-9 reads, my name, DBA company name, LLC. That's not right. Not legal advice, but it's not you doing business as. And okay, I'm riding this fine line. I'm going to give you some general advice, but if I had somebody come to me and they had a personal name, DBA company name, LLC, assuming that is an LLC, you have formed an LLC. You're not the same. Doing business as means it's the same thing. And you as a person is not the same as an LLC. We are on purposely putting a fence there, right? We on purposely want these to be 2 separate entities. And you want to make sure you're honestly only being paid in your LLC so that there's no liability of you personally. So that's, if someone came to me and said, my individual name is a DBA company name, I would have that corrected, because it's not even, I don't even know if that's possible, because you set up an LLC to not be you individually. That could not be a DBA. Your DBA, doing business as, is more like you have a company name LLC doing business as this fictitious name. Your company name LLC is not a fictitious name. So, I mean, I would just be scared that I could be called out for being paid as a individual instead of my LLC. And I wouldn't want it to look like that, because with the LLC, when we even set it up, there are ways that, and I didn't go over this too much, but one thing you may want to note is when you set up an LLC or a corporation or a partnership, we do still have to do things to maintain that status. If we continue to act like we're a sole proprietorship, that we don't have that legal entity, that we aren't having a separate bank account, if we are not establishing those boundaries and acting like it's a separate entity, somebody can come in and still sue us in our personal capacity. So we have to be, careful about that. But our whole purpose is to have LLC away from the individual and to separate all those things. So I wouldn't want to be paid if I'm actually doing work as the LLC. I would want to continue to keep that as just the LLC and not me personally. So I'm not writing that fine line of accidentally still being that sole proprietor personally. Does that make sense? I feel like that was a little convoluted, but.
Destiny, I want to add just one thing to that.
Absolutely.
I've also seen people who are sole proprietors think that if they use DBA, some company name, they can add LLC to it because they're DBA. You cannot use the LLC unless you've actually formed one. That actually violates
That's
corporate
actually
provisions. So you're going to get in trouble with that. The other thing is, here, when we've had people send us Form W-9s like that, we can only use one taxpayer ID number, right? We can only use either your social security number, and if it's you, that's what we're using, or the employee identification number for your business. Now, you can still get one as a DBA, but whatever taxpayer ID is on there, that's what we're sending to the IRS when we give you your 1099. And having it in your personal name is going to give you all the trouble Destiny just told you about. You've now commingled this stuff, which gives proof that you're not operating your company as a separate entity. So just want to throw that in.
No, that's great. That's perfect. I have not heard of that yet, but I'm sure. Jeez. Okay. Sheila, is my CPA where I should start with changing from sole proprietor to LLC? You can definitely start with Missouri, the Secretary of State websites, but honestly, this is just my opinion, but I would start with an attorney on setting up an LLC because like for instance, Missouri requires an operating agreement, and that is a legal agreement that I feel an attorney should be drafting those provisions, but that's just me.
Can you expound on that a little bit? Because I know that Kansas doesn't require an
Kansas is
operating
not
agreement.
required, but it is
So,
definitely recommended.
yeah, and so can you give them a little bit of idea of why you say you recommend an operating agreement, even if you're in Kansas?
Yep. So that operating agreement is going to really put in place the rules and requirements for your business and how that looks like. And if something happens to you or happens to your business, and what would trigger your business being dissolved or you having to, shut your business down, stuff like that. Those major provisions are going to be in there. And then you're not defaulting to this standard law. And again, going back to like, are we thinking about the future? We're putting proactive provisions in there so that if something does happen to you or something, we've got that in place we've got that in place in case something does happen, essentially. That, and if you bring on any other members or investors, they're always going to be asking for that. The bank a lot of times now is asking for that as well too. So not only is it going to give clarity for your business, and it's going to keep things clean if there was ever anything happen to you, but it's also going to almost be required anymore by a lot of things as your business grows. So good thing to have. You want to add anything there, Lisa? I feel like.
No, I think that's fabulous. I just so people know I am also attorney, but I only practice on the Missouri side and California, for those of you. So Missouri and California. And so it was only when I joined the Women's Business Center and started doing more work with Kansas corporations that I learned that Kansas doesn't require it. And I thought, well, what is
so
this?
weird. So if you want some behind the scenes, and if you guys need to, you can put some behind the scenes. So Kansas, when you go to file the LLC, asks for different things than the Missouri does. Yeah. So Kansas actually has an annual filing, right? And Missouri doesn't have an annual filing for an LLC, but Kansas does. And they actually ask who are so much percentage owners in the company. I think it's 25, where Missouri doesn't ask any of those questions. So Missouri is requiring that operating agreement. I'm just saying they're requiring that so that there is documentation of who owns the company and how much, versus Kansas is asking that question, which is mostly what they care about. And that goes back to your BOI filing, guys, beneficial ownership interest. If you have not started thinking about that and you had opened an LLC last year or a corporation or some type of entity with the state, do know that that beneficial ownership interest filing is due by the end of the year. If you opened an LLC or a corporation this year, it'll be due in 90 days. That is also a separate filing where you are setting out who the owners are and their percentage of ownership, as well as some of these other what they call beneficial owners, which could be more or who have a beneficial ownership interest, I should say. That can be more than just, I'm an owner of the company. That could be somebody who substantially manages it or something. So I throw that in there, but I think that's why they go that route. But
Wow, but that's great. So do you have any parting words before we close it out?
just thank you guys. Thank you guys for staying on and asking questions and being interactive. I love it. If you guys need anything, we're here for you.